On June 23rd, Iran fired 14 ballistic missiles at American forces at the Udeid Air Base in Qatar, a response to the U.S. attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities with 14 massive ordnance penetrators. It was the largest ever one-day Patriot engagement in history, resulting in only minimal damage to the base and no casualties.
This really demonstrates the combat capability and capacity of our Army air defenders. Simply stated, they absolutely crushed it.
I'm Tom Karako, Senior Fellow in the Defense and Security Department and Director of the Missile Defense Project here at CSIS. In recent weeks, Army air defenders have been very busy in the defense of Israel with a significant number of THAAD interceptors, for instance, engaging quite a few other Iranian missiles. And to talk about the Udeid Air Base defense and other recent developments in air and missile defense operations, we're delighted to welcome retired Lieutenant General Dan Carbler. Everybody in the missile defense community knows Dan Carbler from his time in uniform, which culminated as Commanding General of Army Space and Missile Defense Command. During that time, he came over to CSIS so often that I had to threaten him. If you kept doing that, we were going to make you some kind of a fellow. One of the principles of deterrence is to carry through with your threats, and he's now a senior advisor with our program and on our board. So thanks very much for coming by. We're going to be taking audience questions, which will come through to my tablet in free-form message through a Patriot ICC, and we'll direct them to General Carbler as they come up. So, as General Kane referenced, we just had the quote from the chairman there. Army air defenders crushed it. I wonder if we might start off with what you saw and how you're thinking about this most recent engagement. Actually, the several recent engagements of both THAAD and Patriot air defenders.
Yeah, sure, Tom. First, thanks for having me on. Be careful what you ask for. Bringing me into CSIS, it's really quite a privilege and honor. First, to hear the chairman speak those words is something that every air defender is put your hand over your heart moment. Really, for 37 years of being in the Army, being air defense, I've been waiting for that kind of recognition at that senior level. So. Good on the chairman for recognizing it, and I will guarantee that every soldier who is deployed, whether they're in the Middle East, whether they're in Indo-PACOM, doing the NORTHCOM mission, EUCOM, wherever the Army air defenders are, they are getting the recognition, and that was a high five moment for them. And just to pull on that just a little bit too, for about 4 years ago, we did a Health of the Force survey, and one of the big elements of the Health of the Force survey was just simple recognition for what our Army air defenders were doing. The highest op tempo in the Army. Unpredictable deployments. Deployments that got extended 3 months or 6 months. Supposed to go for 6 months, they were there for a year. And they felt like they just weren't getting the right level of recognition. But day in and day out, they kept doing the mission. They were trained, certified, and ready to do the mission. And then when it came Super Bowl time, they performed, and the chairman recognized them for that. And then just one last piece, too, is that I'm really happy to see that the air defenders in CENTCOM will be receiving their right shoulder sleeve insignia, their right sleeve combat patch. Well-earned, long overdue, well-deserved. So that's just kind of the Dan Carbler Army Air Defense, super proud of our forces moment. A couple of things that I think to think about for the engagements. We got to recognize that some of those batteries that were involved in engagements were not even from the 32nd. They were from Indo-PACOM. Now you think about that.
Japan and South Korea, right?
Japan and South Korea, right. So you think about how we've level set the training and certification so that you can take units from Indo-PACOM, a totally different environment, even a little bit of a different threat, and move them, no notice almost, and get them into theater and get them certified on the CENTCOM theater operations requirements, and then to be able to perform like they did. You got to take your hats off to the institutional training base, so the Air Defense Commandant, the schoolhouse, as well as the AAMDC commanders, the 94th commander and the 32nd commander were just, that just doesn't happen by magic. There had to have been a lot of work at the highest levels all the way down to those young NCOs and officers training.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the chairman's comments. Very good to see. I think it's just, example 75 of how these threats have become weapons of choice. The things that our adversaries reach for early and often, the things, frankly, that we and our allies reach for. We call them long-range precision fires over and over and over again. I wonder if, do you see that recognition, maybe not publicly, but how do you see the sense within the Army, for instance, of the salience of air and missile defense relative to all the other demand signals that there is. How do you see the reputation and the sense of the value of air defense within the Army?
Super high. I mean, you can go back to General McConville when he was the Chief of Staff, Secretary Warmuth, and the resourcing that they put in Army air defense during their tenure. Obviously, it's a very high priority with the Army. When you look at really over the last 5 years, or from this year, next year, and then the previous 3 years, and you look at the funding that we've had for Army Air Defense, for RDT&E, procurement, et cetera, compared to the previous 5 years, the Secretary and the Chief recognize the threats that are out there, not just ballistic missiles, but UASs as well, cruise missiles, and then they put their money where their mouth is, and they started resourcing Army Air Missile Defense, increasing numbers of formations, capabilities from M-SHORAD, maneuver SHORAD, up to additional Patriot battalions, indirect fire protection capability, the IFPC units that we have out there. So salient, yes. I think that the future is very bright for Army Air Defense. It's never going to be enough, but I think we're on a good path right now.
Yeah, we've got a graph here. I might throw up the recent PB26, and you see, look at the spike in 2026 for a number of capabilities that you just listed off there. I think I suspect it's actually going to be quite a bit more than this. And granted, the PB26 doesn't have the out years for the FIDAP of the next 4 years, but I suspect it's going to be even more, because while this is, after all, the DoD top line is flat, but there was a little tidbit in the J books that came out, and that is that the AROCM, the Army Requirements Oversight Council memorandum, approved a PAC-3 Army procurement objective increase from about 3,300 to over 13,000 going up. That was in April of this year. That is a quadrupling, essentially, of how many PAC-3s, how many MSEs that we need. It's going to be really sporty. It's going to be really interesting. I mean, it sounds to me, it kind of feels like it's a little bit of an oops moment where, like, okay, now we actually do need to get serious about munition capacity. We've been talking about that. We've been admiring the problem of air and missile defense capacity for years and years. Now we have it in writing that, no kidding, our objective is going to quadruple. And frankly, that sounds about right to me. How do you see that playing out and the realism of that coming about?
Yeah, absolutely critical. I mean, when it seems like the COCOMs line up outside the factory door when PAC-3 MSCs are being produced, and they're stealing them and they're grabbing them to get them out into their particular areas of responsibility. So you could never have enough PAC-3s. And something that's important to remember, pre-PAC-3, it was just 4 missiles on a launcher. Well, now each launcher holds 16 missiles, so times 4. So if you think about your basic loadout we had back in the day, where you only had 32 missiles in a battery, now you take 16 times 8 launchers. You're really fourfolding the numbers of missiles that you have in a battery.
This image is a 4-pack, PAC-2s.
Yeah, right. So imagine this, but now each one of those canisters actually has 4 PAC-3s on them, so for 16 on the launcher. And so we're finally meeting some of the requirements. We've seen numerous studies about the different adversary missile quantities that they have out there and capabilities. And the PAC-3 MSE is the right answer. And then especially when we start to integrate the THAAD and with the MSE missile, now all of a sudden you've expanded that battle space. That MSE missile can take advantage of the THAAD radars capabilities, and really take the shot much further out to allow you re-engagement if needed.
Yeah, the TPY-2 just allows it to reach its kinematic range as opposed to being limited. Let me go back to the Udeid attack. I mean, again, lots of fantastic engagements on the THAADs with Israel. The number hasn't come out, but it's a lot. What other kind of takeaways are you hearing, say, within the Army, within the ADA folks? How are these episodes being perceived and talked about? Yes, it's a little bit of chest beating, I imagine, but is there concern about capacity? Is there a concern about op-tempo, which you referenced there? What's kind of the conversation about these recent number of engagements?
Yeah, certainly op-tempo is always going to be a consideration. I mean, we have not met the SecDef's red line of 1 to 2 forever. I mean, we were kind of congratulating ourselves when we actually met the red line of 1 to 2, because we had been 1 to 1.8. I mean, which is 1 year deployed to less than 2 years back at home station. And when we actually reached the red line, which is the one you're not supposed to go beneath, 1 to 2, we thought, oh, that's great. And we actually had a little bit of stability there, a little bit of predictability for about 18 months. And but then we saw, the need for Army Air Defenders to be deployed again, such to the extent that we had to take our top priority, Indo-PACOM theater, and move assets from Indo-PACOM into the Middle East to counter the threats. You can't, when there are soldiers deployed in harm's way, you've got to protect them.
Yeah. And there have been some news reports. I think Politico broke the story about a week ago about potentially suspending, I think it was about 30 PAC-3s that had already been, I think they're already in Poland, already scheduled to go to Ukraine, as well as a handful of other munitions, some old AIM-7s and Hellfires and this sort of thing. And I think ostensibly in the reporting, the concern was that, hey, we gotta steward every PAC-3 for Indo-PACOM, right? You just mentioned the 2 batteries being taken from Japan and Korea, moved from Indo-PACOM over to CENTCOM, and there is this giant sucking sound in PACOM for all, in CENTCOM for all kinds of munitions in recent months. How are you seeing the kind of the balance between those theaters in terms of the air defense role?
Yeah, so the Secretary and the Chairman made a risk calculus, knowing that there was going to be some sort of operation that took place in the Middle East, knowing that they had to provide maximum protection of our soldiers. We had to pull assets from around the globe to do that. Just to have left what we had in CENTCOM at the time was not going to be enough. Whether it was redundant coverage, so a couple of Patriot batteries covering the same site, or just being able to cover multiple critical assets as determined by the CENTCOM commander. We just had to get more there. We had to assume some risk, and I don't know the discussions that took place with the Japanese or the Korean leadership, but I'm sure that they had to understand, but I'm also sure that they're going to want their Patriot units back pretty quick. China isn't taking a day off, and we know that's the threat out there too.
Yeah. There is an aspect of the Udeid attack that has it's been a little bit of a head scratcher to me. Kind of in connection with what I was just talking about in terms of the suspension of aid to Ukraine. And I think right after or maybe it was right before the MOPS hit the nuclear facilities, the president tweeted out or truthed out or whatever that if the Iranians retaliated, that we would hit them back twice as hard. We've got a clip here of President Trump commenting actually about something a little bit different, if we could pull that up.
They called me to tell me they have to take a shot at us. This was Iran, very respectful. That means they respect us. Because we dropped 14 bombs, they said, we'd like to take 14 shots at you. I said, go ahead, I understand.
So here's the head scratcher for me, which is that after warning there would be massive retaliation against them if they did this, then there appears to be this setup. And this doesn't take away in the slightest from the professionalism, the skill, and the accomplishments of the air defenders here, and frankly the capability of the missiles to go and intercept them. But it kind of feels like a bit of a face-saving exercise for the Iranians. And so I'm scratching my head thinking, wait a minute, we can't spare 30 PAC-3s for Ukraine, but we're going to spare probably a similar number to make the Iranians feel better about themselves. How do you think about that kind of a quantity of what was expended here in the bigger scheme of things, in the contribution of essentially diplomacy and de-escalation? It was a de-escalating event in the end, assuming that it doesn't pop up again.
Mm-hmm. First, amazing to me that kind of telegraphing was going on by missile count. Some of the Patriot folks will appreciate this, but when you're fighting the air battle, you have what's called a two-bay engaged cube. So you can see how many missiles are out there waiting to be engaged. That's probably the earliest that any Patriot operator got 14 missiles in the to-be engaged queue by notification from the Iranians. I say that just a little bit kind of tongue in cheek.
Sure.
I don't know that I'm glad the president trusted the air defenders to go 14 for 14 or 13 for 14. I'm glad he trusted that. I don't know that that's the way that we should be signaling or using our Army air defenders in that manner to appease or be able to save face for the Iranians. I don't care how simple the missile attack was, how few. I mean, 14 is a pretty large number of missiles to fire. And again, hats off to the Patriot system and the soldiers who manned it and who engaged all those incoming missiles. That 37 years, almost 37 years of doing this business, that was a first for me.
Yeah. I'm old enough to remember people grousing that you couldn't hit a bullet with a bullet, right? And now hit to kill has become so routine, and it's being taken for granted. And I guess that's my concern is it's so good that it's taken for granted that it will be as effective as it certainly was in this engagement and lots of other engagements, that it kind of sets up peculiar dynamics and that sort of thing. And I remember when you were in uniform, we talked about a similar dynamic, which was, I think the phrase was, we don't have belt-fed Patriot, right? We just don't have massive quantities lying around. We're hopefully going to ramp up production if we can get there, but we just don't have any. So I guess that would be my comment is a concern about these being expended willy-nilly, that kind of thing. So
yeah, willy nilly is a tough one. If it's threatening the defended asset, it's going to get engaged. It has to. If we can fend off the attacks for 4 days and allow the attack ops platforms that the U.S. Air Force and Navy and others have in order to go knock out the TELs, knock out the silos, knock out the bombers or whatever delivery means that are out there, then we've really done our job. And if we have more missiles, we'll either do weighted coverage and make sure we know where the priority effort is, or we'll be able to look across the breadth of defended assets we have to cover and put those missiles there. And that's the beauty about having IBCS too, is now you have the ability to really open up your defense design and protect more assets with fewer sensors or fewer specific Patriot batteries being required to be on that asset.
And to read what you just said, and to clarify, once the missiles are in the air, you've got to engage them. There's no question about it. But I think in some respect, I'm talking about the policymakers and the political decision makers who are left of launch, treating, again, Patriots as kind of an attritable asset, an expendable asset. And that's kind of what worries me, and I hope that it gets stemmed a bit.
I agree. I mean, when you looked at the last missile defense review, and we tried to get some language in there about prevention and preemptive attacks to take care of the calculus, left of launch, to keep it simpler for our air defense units, thinning out the arrows before they even launch off the bow. That becomes a big policy decision. How preemptive do you want to be? I mean, I love the fact that the Israelis had, the trucks out there with the drones on them, and they shot. I mean, that's like classic attack option. Take care of that before it even launches. So, how many of those missiles did it take care of before?
But we also saw in that engagement, scud hunting is hard, and hundreds and hundreds, over 400 missiles came in reportedly to Israel over the course of that long weekend. It's really hard to get everything on the ground, and that's why you need air defense.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, tunneling, hiding, hide sites, etc. You're never going to get them all, so you got to have the air defense capability there.
And you mentioned kind of moving to some of the modernization and that sort of the equation. You mentioned, for instance, IBCS and what that enables in terms of the componentization and the smoothing out of the battery. The batteries, for instance. We've got a question that's come in here from Byron Callan. He wants to know, is 18 Patriot batteries enough?
I'll assume 18 battalions.
Battalions, excuse me. Battalions, yeah.
If you're a combatant commander, no, it's not. You'll never have enough, but that's why we have IBCS to help the calculus there. So now I don't need to have a specific Patriot battery for every single defended asset. Now I'm able to put sensing capabilities, effector capabilities, read that as launchers, and then the C2 capabilities, much more widely dispersed. And we've practiced that. They're going through, right now, 343 Air Defense Battalion is going through its FOT&E out of White Sands Missile Range to really ring out the system across the breadth of White Sands Missile Range to see exactly how much real estate can they cover with the minimum number of assets. And we'll do that analysis and then be able to come back so that when a COCOM asks for a capability, he or she shouldn't just be asking for, give me a Patriot battery. It should be, this is how much area I need to defend with these many critical assets. You do then the mission analysis and the defense design and say, well, we can do this with, what before had been a Patriot battalion, maybe now it's just a couple of IBCS enabled batteries.
Yeah. Well, sort of staying in that vein, you listed off some of these before, but we've got everything in the pipeline from NGSRI, the Next Generation Short Range Interceptor, the Stinger follow-on. We've got the IFPC, the AIM-9 in a box with hopefully a supersonic cruise missile killer second interceptor coming soon. We've got a couple non-kinetic HPM and laser programs the Army's working on. And a handful of IBCS and other things as well. Like, how do you think about the prioritization of these many AMD programs within the Army?
I think that we have got to make sure the maneuver forces are protected. That is a skill. Patriot's okay, right? And we can talk about capacity. We know we need capacity. We need more missiles. More Patriot batteries is always better. And IBCS is helping us out with that, as is LTAMS. But where we really have a shortfall is in our maneuver SHORAD. You got to think about it. 20 plus years ago, when the Army made the decisions to remove the divisional SHORAD battalions out of the divisions, we lost a capability, a skill set, and expertise, all within a year. And now we're seeing how long it takes to recreate that capability. And it's not just about providing the kit, the equipment, the sensors, the interceptors, but now the training for the air defenders, from lieutenant up to colonel and private up to sergeant major. That whole generation, I would argue today's brigade commanders just were not brought up with maneuver SHORAD like we were used to before we lost the divisional battalions. And so we've got to train our air defenders, got to get the equipment out there, but also we've got to make sure that the maneuver commanders out there now know how to train and use their air defense forces. And so that marrying up has got to take place. We've been at it now for a couple of years, whether it's at the combat training centers or MCTPs, the warfighters that we do. But we need many, many more sets and reps, and we need to do it with soldiers, equipment, and get it out to the force as soon as we can.
So I'm glad you mentioned the maneuver there. We've had General Rainey over from Army Futures Command a number of times, and he said, other senior leaders in the Army have said that we are shifting, and we need to shift from fires in support of maneuver to maneuver in support of fires. And actually, we have a question come in right in this vein here from the internet about most success with PAC-3 has been in defense of fixed positions or bases. How do you see air defensive maneuver forces panning out? Right, and it is a different thing to do when you're on the move. For instance, I've heard you say in the past, including here at CSIS when you're in uniform, that we can't Patriot our way out of this problem. So then, how do we get after that? What is the relation between maneuver and the counter missile activities?
Yeah, so that's when we're bringing in the capabilities like IFPC. So you got to look at first, always start with the threat. So what is the threat against that particular maneuver force? Is it UAVs? Is it cruise missiles? Is it rotary wing, fixed wing, or is it going to be ballistic missiles? Then best that the J2 or the G2 can provide us, or the S2 can provide us. Once you determine what the threat is, then that's going to drive then what capabilities need to be provided. I think the beauty of the air defense modernization is we're not just relying on Patriot, right? So we have a lot of different counter UAS capabilities that are out there right now, as well as the ones that are in the pipeline. We have IFPC that's being fielded right now. We've got Patriot, obviously, in THAAD. So depending where it's at on the battle space is going to determine what the threat is going to be and then what capabilities we're going to provide to it. Again, and that's the beauty about IBCS, designed so that you can network out all those capabilities in, the old plug and fight, but plug and fight to protect a maneuver battalion or plug and fight to protect the Corps, the Division TOC, or an air base.
Yeah. Well, and in that vein, my other Army mentor, Dick Formica, would give me a hard time if I didn't ask you about offense-defense integration. That's the other kind of thing is, yes, you want the componentization of all these things to be fluid in how you design your defense. But, again, back to Al Udeid, that was active defense. That was sitting and playing catch. Yes, it was after our attack ops, but where's your mind in terms of offense-defense integration? We talk about it all the time. We talk about the two schoolhouses and the two wings of the schoolhouse. Where do you see that for the Army ADA?
So there's definite role for offensive-defensive integration. I stop short of saying it needs to become one fires branch, though. I think that both field artillery and air defense artillery, the technical requirements to know your weapon system, be able to fight your weapon system, train and certify on it, are just too complicated to try to make this uber fires officer or uber fires non-commissioned officer. First off, TRADOC has cut back on the number of training days that we even have to put a soldier in the pipeline to teach them air defense skills or field artillery skills. Same with officers. And unless TRADOC's willing to give us about 2 years of training time to get everybody experts in the fires capabilities, I think that we need to maintain our separate branches because of the separate core warfighting capabilities that they bring. That's not to say that integration can't help in planning, which it absolutely needs to. It's not to say that you can't have field artillery officers or air defense artillery officers serving on separate staffs. I mean, we have field artillery officers in the AA MBCs. I believe we even have some as battalion XOs. And we have air defense, and same with air defense officers serving in field artillery units. So it's there. When we want to talk about then the warfighting integration, if those missiles are launched, and we have a pretty good idea where the point of origin was from the air defense perspective, I don't know why we're not sitting right next to the fire supporter saying, "Hey, counter battery and go launch a hypersonic on this fleeting target or on this TEL or whatever."
So I guess I am reminded of if there, and all resources are finite, of course, but if there's not enough training days for air defenders, then we're going to have a bit of a hard time expanding the force, of adding additional battalions to our other conversation a minute ago. And it also, I would say, is a piece of the answer to how big Army is prioritizing the air defense mission. So I think maybe the training thing is something worth revisiting. Another thing, it's very common in defense circles to talk about, uneven budgets, right? Especially for munitions, up and down, feast and famine, this sort of stuff. There's also been a fair bit of, look, Army PEO Missiles in Space has never had so many new missile and missile defense things in the pipeline all at once as they do in recent years. So there's a lot of change going on in the force. And yes, IBCS is kind of the basis for all of those new elements coming on. But how do you see the pace of change? How is that affecting the force, the air defenders who are going to be moving between THAAD and Patriot and IFPC and all this sort of stuff? How do you see the pace of change in terms of the hardware, but also as it affects the training and the operations?
Yeah, it sure is a double-edged sword, right? So you want to stay relevant to the threat. You want the pace of change to go rapid. But my generation are the benefactors of having a pretty stable weapon system. Patriot, we get our software upgrades, but the Patriot weapon system stayed pretty stable. So from the time of lieutenant all the way up to battalion commander, you had familiarity with the system, you had expertise built on the system, and you could deploy it. And we're seeing that today. My concern, though, would be with change is that if you're changing so rapidly, whether it's weapon system components, the software, hardware upgrades, and if you're changing every 12 to 18 months, how does that young lieutenant get comfortable and confident in their system if there's another software build that drops in on them that totally changes the configuration of the system or how they're used to fighting the weapon system? Or those young non-commissioned officers who are used to operating the system one way, then all of a sudden, just 18 months later, we've changed it on them. And let's face it, the documents, the manuals, the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, they're very, very hard to keep up. So what ends up happening is the soldiers out in the front lines are being very innovative, figuring out what the TTPs are and applying them right away. General Rainey has a great saying. He says, the closer you are to the sound of the battle or the sound of the gunfire, the quicker you are to innovate. And we're seeing that. But again, that's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. I mean, at the same time, of course, the threat gets a vote. And as we've seen, you know, back into Aegis Force, for instance, Red Sea operations have been a forcing function for them to be updating their software at a much faster rate than they had been in years past, where they just sort of did it on a more relaxed basis. And so the threat gets a vote. It's going to force us to getting those more frequent updates. And of course, engineers like to change everything, like the console of your car every time there's a redesign, but hopefully it can be done in a way that is both agile and adaptive to the threat changes while also being operator friendly. Is there anything that they ought to be thinking about so that when those changes come through, they're not disruptive, as it were?
Yeah, so let me, almost 37 years in the Army gives me the opportunity to tell war stories. So here's one out of Desert Storm when we were in Israel. And if you remember, Saddam's Scuds, when they were coming in, they were breaking up, right? Where our system was not, the radar was not, we didn't have the filters on there to be able to just filter out everything, right?
Figure out what's what.
Right, warhead, rocket motor, fins, et cetera. It was all showing up, and they were all classifying as TBMs. What we had to do was, we would train the operators then, and we would literally, it was a pen, here comes the ballistic missile, here comes the warhead, and we made the operator go through all the actions, hook the leading piece of debris, or the leading TBM out there, because that was generally the warhead, because it was keeping some aerodynamic properties, hook that and manually engage that. That was the training software package that we got. So as we're fielding the software upgrades, I would really commend Frank Lozano and PO Missile and Space to take a look at what are the training packages that are going to go along with that, so that it makes it easier for our operators. And a lot of time, the TADS devices, right, the training devices, they're kind of the last thought of, and they're the first cut. Whenever there's funding, it's like, we don't need the TADS devices. When we see this rapid fielding changes, the training devices really have got to come forward for our soldiers.
Yeah, and that would apply today to both the legacy Patriot ICC, but also the IBCS, folks that are coming. Well, look, there's not a whole lot of detail out about the architecture and the plans for the Golden Dome initiative, but nevertheless, in as much as human beings spend most of their time on the domain called land, I would not be surprised if the Army or the Army National Guard didn't have a significant role in the operation of at least the ground-based air defense elements for the forthcoming Golden Dome capabilities. I wonder, again, especially given your experience for SMDC, how are you thinking about the potential and maybe some potential challenges, both the upside potential and the challenges that need to be overcome for Army operation of say, some significant air and missile defense capability in CONUS, in the homeland?
Yeah, so, if you look at Joint Doctrine, whatever service has the majority of capability, that becomes the area air defense commander. So if you just kind of go to Doctrine. But when you look at the ground-based air defense aspect of what Golden Dome, what's going to be required of Golden Dome, I believe the Golden Dome area air defense commander should be an Army officer. Does that mean that the SMDC commander in his or her other hat, which is the Joint Functional Component Commander for Integrated Missile Defense with the Joint Staff, should they morph that into the Golden Dome for America Joint Task Force? That's what I've kind of been advocating for, looking at. That makes the most sense. They're already, the JIFIC IMD commander, Sean Gainey, he already works for the NORTHCOM commander in the role of ASCC for GMD, so the Army Service Component Command for Ground-Based Mid-Course Defense. Well, now you just broaden that into the JTF for Golden Dome for America. Responsible, and actually would be responsible for not just the ground-based part, but probably would be responsible for any of the aerial assets too, working in close coordination with NORAD. And then, we're going to have to exercise our forces. There's going to be a huge give and take now for deployed forces versus what are we going to bring back to do the underlayer, the terminal phase defense that the executive order called for.
Yeah. Well, but of course, that joint task force, if it materializes, is going to require a lot of people. It's going to require a lot of air defenders, and it's going to require training to all that sort of stuff. So I guess I'll be looking to see whether that materializes and comes through, so that the Army, so the other services actually have the people and the training, and as well as the equipment for Golden Dome air defense, air missile defense.
Yeah, I mean, so this is probably controversial as well, but we need to really look at the National Guard units, Army National Guard units, and what their current missions are and what their formations are. And if you have National Guard units around the periphery of the United States and they're doing maneuver missions or other missions, is there an opportunity to remission them to become Golden Dome for America forces, to own their part of the real estate or their part of the architecture, whether it's a sensor, effector farms, maybe a C2 element, hosting Golden Dome for America forces on an installation? We need to take a look at that. The model's there, right? The Alaska National Guard and the Colorado National Guard have been doing the GMD mission for more than 20 years now. And so we figured out how to make sure that the National Guard can do a 24/7 mission while still maintaining National Guard status. I think that's, as we're looking at, hey, how are we going to get the force structure to do this, I think we definitely have to tap in the National Guard.
Yeah. Well, look, we've covered a lot of topics here, and we'll have to have you back to do some more of these here soon. But any last words or thoughts in terms of Army air defense? Any air defenders you'd like to give a shout out to?
Well, my many visits to CSIS, I always got to bring up my kids. Well, my daughter at the time, because she's an air defender, and it's very interesting. So son and daughter, both air defenders, and they're across the waterfront of modernization. My daughter's IFPC battery commander up at JBLM. So that battalion, high power microwave, as well as IFPC, and then my son is in 343 right now doing IBCS and LTAMS testing. So we have a very interesting family dinner discussion in the skiff. But yeah, my shout out would be to my two kids, but also those soldiers that are Army Air Defense soldiers who, rightly so, have had a high five moment here the last few weeks.
Indeed, I've been doing some good shooting. Well, hey, General Carbler, thanks again for coming in, and we'll have you back. Thanks everybody for tuning in online and for submitting the questions. So,
thanks, Tom.